Okay. Hey everybody, this is Andrew Maraniss. I'm the author of Singled Out, which is a new biography of Glenn Burke, who was the first openly gay Major League Baseball player and the inventor of the high five. And I'm here with Tim Corbin, who's the head baseball coach here at Vanderbilt, two-time national champion. We're in his office at beautiful Hawkins Field, and he's nice enough to give us some time today. And Coach, I admire you as a baseball coach, but even more so as a person.
Thank you.
So it's really an honor to have a chance to talk to you about my new book.
Likewise, I really enjoyed it. That was a very good read, very quick read. So
Yeah.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for dumbing it down for us dumber baseball coaches.
Right. Well, I intentionally write books that are meant for middle school, high school kids and adults. And, nobody wants to read the big doorstop of a book, right?
Right.
But I'm really excited to talk baseball with you also. And, one thing about Glenn is that he was the inventor of the high five, right? Mm-hmm. And one thing I think about when I watch your teams is the connection, even the physical connection that your players seem to have on the field. It's like when someone hits a home run or executes a good bunt, they come running back into the dugout and everybody's there to greet them, it seems like. Is that an intentional thing with your program?
Yeah, it's intentional. Probably starts out as being more manufactured than anything at first, but once they start to understand the concept behind it and the emotion behind it, then it becomes a natural movement. And many times in your book, it was noted with Glenn about his presence inside the clubhouse and his presence on the field over and over and over. It was almost like, if we're going to have fun, just make sure that you include Glenn Burke. And I've noted that many times with our guys in terms of being a positive life force, and that really is your ability to pass along energy to the next person. This game tests you at every turn, and there's so many times where the outcomes of what you're doing are more negative than positive, and you start to understand that when you're playing it, you rely heavily on the people around you to keep your energy level moving in a positive direction. And the high five in that case was something that was celebratory, but in our case, as you asked me, the connection piece is just your ability to touch and make eye contact with a player that's coming off the field or going onto the field or what have you. There's certain dead times in the sport of baseball that I think for most people become just blah, but you make those dead times important by your connecting with other people. And so we've stressed that. We've paid a lot of attention to it. I think it brings upon great feelings. And once you start it, then it almost mushrooms, basically. The kids take it upon themselves to make it even greater than what it is. And it's all about the environment, Andrew. If you got a great environment, then and people feel good inside that environment, then your true human feelings are going to come out. And those certainly lead to better behaviors on the baseball field.
Okay. It was interesting to me in interviewing some of Glenn's Dodgers teammates. They hear in the 70s, this is a veteran team with that infield that was together for 10 years, but they welcomed this rookie who was loud and funny and had his boombox, as a Dusty Baker told me there's two kinds of rookies: the ones that are annoying and you don't like them
right.
interrupting the presence or the culture you've built, and the kinds that kind of take the pressure off, and bring that levity to the clubhouse. And I thought that really was said a lot about Glenn, that even as a rookie, he's able to walk into that veteran clubhouse and have a presence that was appreciated. What are your thoughts about bringing in new players to your program and what sort of role that they're able to have?
Well, I think someone that Dusty's talking about is someone that has enough awareness to where they come into a new environment and they scope it out first. I think someone that's brash enough just to come in and lay down their personality right away, it's a 50-50 chance whether or not that personality is going to work. Some find their way because of their abilities, and we've had it many times in this program where in August, September, and October, you can see a little bit of resentment towards that player, but in January, February, and March, they go, we can't do without that player. And then there's guys that come in and as I said earlier, they they kind of scope everything out, and then they start to insert themselves, and they start to blend their personality into the group. Now, just based on your book, and certainly not privy to the Dodgers clubhouse at that time, but it seems like Glenn Burke was very comfortable in his own skin, and he just allowed his personality to play in the most positive way. Made fun of himself, made fun of other people in a locker room way, which is needed, because what you do is you keep everyone on guard and you keep everyone grounded, and that's, when you're talking about males that are talented, that's pretty important, Andrew. So I just think when I saw that and when I read that, I felt like this kid had a unique intangible that was appreciated by other people around him. And even though he may have been loud and boisterous, there was something about him from a chemistry standpoint that lent itself to the team that became positive, that was more rewarded by, I would say, most players, the players at least you spoke to, than others. I mean, I know you spoke to Tony Kemp, but when I started reading a lot of that, that's who I thought of.
Is that right?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. Tony's a positive life force, and Tony was one of those guys that inserted his personality right away, and you couldn't help but not love. I mean, when someone shows their teeth all the time, there's something vibrant about that. There's something very positive about someone who does that.
All right, I've got one more question for you, and I know you were going to ask me some, but talk about Glenn being comfortable in his own skin, which he was. On the other hand, for a long time he had this secret, that he was gay. He was kind of looking over his shoulder at times, literally and figuratively, and some people will look at Glenn's statistics and say, oh, well, he wasn't that good of a Major League Baseball player. His defenders, who I really trust, such as Dusty Baker, will say, well, he never really had a chance. He wasn't able to be comfortable, to be himself. And in this game, you have to feel comfortable and supported in order to succeed as a hitter, especially. In the major leagues, probably the toughest skill that there is in sports. I mean, as a coach, what's your sort of perspective on just the comfort and confidence that is necessary to become your best self as a ball player?
Well, I mean, it's very true. I mean, I think Dusty raises a good point. I think that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of connection. And connection stimulates energy, it stimulates emotion, and it makes people feel better in the environment. And I think in Glenn's situation, and we talked about earlier before we started taping this, that you have to look back at that time in the 70s as a black person, in which there were not a lot of black baseball players in the big leagues, and you're a black baseball player that knows that he's gay. You're basically overcoming two human mountains inside the game of baseball, really unknowing the people on your left and right, even though they're your teammates, are going to stand by you when you come out and tell someone that this is how I am. And you think about if you hold something in internally and you can't sweat it out, you become very combustible inside as a human and as an individual, and it becomes somewhat restrictive, both mentally and physically, on your behaviors and what you want to do once you get onto the field. You're probably, at best, maybe 60% of yourself, of your 100%, which you're trying to give to the team. So, and I think of a lot of ways, Dusty hit it on the head. I mean, that's very restrictive. I mean, think about never really being able to sit down and be yourself, that you and me in this conversation right here just can't let go with what we're talking about, what we're feeling, because we're hiding something behind us. And this person had to do it inside of an environment in which he was trying to play in the big leagues, he was trying to stick in the big leagues, he was trying to prove who he was going to be, but prove who you're going to be with the mindset of, are people going to doubt me as a person if I ever come out and tell them who I really am? You're living two different lives. That's very difficult to do. So, I think, as a college baseball coach, you try to open the door inside your own program for people to be who they want to be. And you try to allow them to be comfortable in their own skin. And when you're 18, 19, I know that has to be difficult, because until you're really comfortable, like a Tony Kemp, then you probably don't allow people to understand who you really are as a person. So I think that was very difficult for that young man, and it's really unfortunate. But I don't mean to keep talking here, but and I know you painted several chapters about Anita Bryant in there, but what you're doing is you're portraying what the country and what our country felt about someone who was gay at that time, and the hatred going towards a person, and even someone like Harvey Milk who just was out there with that. At the same time, you got to be pretty brave to do that at that time, not knowing where your defense is coming, where your offense is coming, and worrying about your own physical health, in terms of someone not liking who you are, and then just trying to do something about it. So I just thought it was a difficult time period.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you one more question. I guess I lied. So one other question about,
Oh.
I don't know, I'm sure we've had gay players at Vanderbilt who just hadn't come out. I mean, what do you think the environment is like in college baseball right now if a player, whether here or somewhere else, did come out? Do you feel that they would be supported in general by their teammates and by just sort of the environment around the game right now? How have things progressed, would you say, since the 70s?
Well, they've progressed for sure. I think males are more empathetic towards anything at this point. I think, as I said, for an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid, it would be still difficult to come out and tell people who you are. But at the same time, I think that today has a chance to be way more favorable. I mean, we would certainly celebrate that inside of our own program. As you know, our program is very diverse.
Yes.
We have a lot of different backgrounds. We have really, from an ethnic standpoint, really everything covered, and that's very purposeful. And I've always told the kids and parents that come here, I think that's their greatest education. I think it's the ability to understand different backgrounds, different religious faiths, but still be able to honor them, understand them, listen to them, because I just think that's an essential piece of life, is just understanding other people to get along with them, and learning how to listen. Learning how to listen rather than talk, and staying away from being so judgmental in what you're doing. I think for guys that's very important.
What an important lesson for just today's culture, too. All right, so what jumped out at you as you were reading the book, or any questions that you wanted to ask about Glenn?
Yeah, I think, the Oakland area, I'm a little bit familiar with, and so on, but I guess I just wanted to know from his standpoint, the people that you interviewed, who were, and I know you mentioned Dusty, but who were the people that in your mind came to his defense and spoke about him glowingly as a person, not so much from a baseball standpoint, but maybe people that did play baseball with him, but that spoke with him glowingly as a person and saw who he was as an individual?
Okay. The real answer is that pretty much anybody that knew Glenn Burke loved him. I talked to his friends when he was a little kid, playing Little League baseball. And they talked about how he kept the dugout in stitches, at those games. He was the funniest guy they had ever met. And as a young man at the playground, Bushrod Park in Oakland, he was kind of king of the hill as a basketball player, too. So he got a lot of respect because he was the first kid that could dunk. And then he was the first kid that could really dunk, and get way above the rim. So he got a lot of just respect from all the neighborhood kids for that. In school, he was a really good singer, and so he actually had an opportunity to sing on an album of the Limelighters as a little kid. So he was just very talented, energetic. He talked about life forces. Like sounds like any room that Glenn Burke ever walked into, like you couldn't take your eyes off of me. Like he was keeping you laughing. He had a bit of a temper, so his minor league teammates talked about that some, and they weren't sure like which Glenn is going to show up. But I think the energetic, positive, funny Glenn sort of outweighed any of the temperamental Glenn in their mind. So his minor league teammates, first of all, they admired the physique that he had. I mean, he had these 17-inch biceps. He was the strongest, fastest, best athlete they had ever seen. I talked to Rupert Jones,
Yeah, I remember
longtime major leaguer, who said that Glenn was the best athlete that he's ever seen. Junior Gilliam, the coach for the Dodgers, longtime coach, he's the one that compared his potential to Willie Mays. So here's a person that had a lot of respect from good athletes. They recognized Glenn as above average athlete, and then just as a person, he was a funny person to be around. So everybody I talked to loved him, which I thought set up an interesting dilemma for the reader, to see that, okay, here's a person who just meeting Glenn, everybody loves him. But then once they found out he was gay, then he lost a lot of support from some people, and how unfair that was, that just because of who he was, it negated everything about what they already knew about him, in some people's minds.
I know you're not a psychologist, but this is what went through my mind when I was reading your book, that the one side of him being a dancer, comic, love of life, and then a side of him on the field that showed an angry side. And you know what, we're all guilty of that once we get into a competitive situation. But I want to ask you, just based on your thoughts, and you probably know where I'm going with this, how much of that anger do you think came from the fact that he couldn't really bring himself out and tell people who he was?
Yeah, I think it's attributable to that.
Okay.
Like you said, I'm not a psychiatrist, psychologist, but I think so. I think he was keeping a lot bottled up inside, and there had to be some outlet for it.
Yep.
And his knowing that he couldn't be who he was around his teammates, some of the positive attributes of Glenn, like his bravado and his humor, I think was somewhat of a distraction from who he really was also. And he said that he wanted to behave in a way that people would like him, even when quote unquote when they found out who he was. So I think there was some of that involved. But I do think the brawls he would get in on the field, even like taking out some of his teammates on buses, on road trips, was related to all that he had bottled up inside, for sure.
Of all the general managers and coaches that were around him, who's the one coach that you found? Because even it seemed like Campanis admired him, wanted to take care of him, and then all of a sudden, as we get towards the end of their relationship with the Dodgers, that went south. Lasorda, that went south. Which coach do you feel like was able to stand by him and just say, that's my guy?
Yeah, I would say a guy named Bill Barrier.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a baseball name that you know. He was a minor league manager for decades. Was Glenn's manager at Spokane when he was in rookie ball. And he's still alive. He's like 90 years old. I interviewed him for the book, and he had no prejudice against Glenn for being gay, for a 90-year-old guy, and he respected Glenn as a baseball player. He'd also been around for a while, and he wasn't going to put up with any of Glenn's sort of BS. He would call him on it. And Glenn respected that. Glenn would, if he had a pushover for a manager, which he did in Albuquerque, he ran all over him.
Right.
But Bill Barrier would take him on in games of horse on the basketball court, beat him with like an old school hook shot or something, and Glenn was impressed with that. If Glenn thought that Barrier, they told a story like he wanted his sport coat. He liked his jacket. And so Barrier laid it on the bleachers and said, come get it. You've got an hour to get it, but I'm going to like beat you up if you try to even get it, right? And Glenn respected that. And so I think it just took someone sort of dealing with Glenn at his own level rather than being intimidated by the bravado that Glenn had. And so they had a lifelong friendship. And you could tell that Barrier really admired all that Glenn was trying to overcome.
You start the first chapter and kind of tell the end at the beginning and so on. In your mind, where was maybe the demise of life? Where did life start to just move? Was it the accident? Was it leaving baseball? Where do you think it just?
Yeah. So Glenn's life is inspirational in some ways and tragic in a lot of ways. And for those who don't know, I mean, he was essentially run out of Major League Baseball due to homophobia. The Dodgers traded him to Oakland. Billy Martin and the A's demoted him to AAA, and he knew he was never going to get called up. And so he leaves baseball after only 3 years. 2 years after starting in the World Series, he's out of the game already. For a brief period, he has some happiness, you know, even outside of baseball. When he's living in San Francisco before AIDS, he's playing softball for bars and enjoying being the best softball player in San Francisco. Then, like you said, there's the accident. He gets hit by a car just walking across the street, and he loses his identity as an athlete, which I'm sure you talk to your players about, like what comes after baseball, you know? And so even though he wasn't playing Major League Baseball, he was at least getting to be an athlete and play softball. And he played in the first 2 gay games, which were kind of like the Olympics, and was winning medals. But all of a sudden, he's got these broken legs, and he's like, who am I other than an athlete? And so he's dealing with physical pain and takes drugs to deal with that, but also dealing with this sort of bigger question of, I don't know who I am if I'm not an athlete. And that sort of starts, in my mind, this cycle that never ends, you know, and he ends up experiencing homelessness and does get AIDS and dies broke, homeless of AIDS, and sort of a tragic end to his story for sure.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you writing the book. It's going to be used in our classroom at some point in time, because it's going to enter into conversations about people just in general, and hopefully open the doors for kids that are inside the program that understand people in the game and also understand what that time looked like for that person as opposed to what it looks like right now, and how a support system can be granted and can be warranted and can be celebrated by the people around them. So I'll be appreciative of that. I think that will certainly inspire a lot of good conversations in our classroom.
Well, thanks, Coach. That means a lot to me, and I think you could see if Glenn had been supported, that not only would have benefited Glenn, it would have benefited his team and society too. And so, I mean, I hope that people will take that away from the book of the tragedy of homophobia is not only the what it does to that person, but what we all lose. You know, we all lost the benefit of a character and a player like Glenn Burke.
And that's just one person. I mean, that's one person who played baseball, and you think of the many people that didn't have his background that unfortunately were never able to live a life of fulfillment because of that.
Well, Coach, thank you for your time. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks, Andrew.
You've got such a great program, model program people admire for all kinds of reasons, and this is just another example of that. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.